Entire languages that once powered global trade have vanished completely. These lost trade tongues were the silent architects of our modern world, building the very foundations of our globalized society. Their story reveals a profound mystery. Why did these critical tools of connection disappear from history? And what hidden truths about the rise and fall of empires are buried with them? By the end of this journey, you will understand the invisible forces that truly shaped our laws, our economies, and even the words you use every single day. How did a language spoken only by fishermen in the frozen Arctic change the course of commerce? What secret codes guided ancient caravans across the vast Sahara? We are about to uncover how communication built our world and then erased its own tracks. What do you believe is the most powerful force that connects different cultures? The docks of a 16th-century Mediterranean port were a cacophony of a dozen different tongues. A Venetian merchant haggled with an Ottoman official, while a Spanish captain tried to reason with a Greek fisherman. In this world of clashing empires and faiths, a phantom language was born to bridge the divides. It was called the Lingua Franca, a pidgin tongue stitched together from Italian and Occitan, and sprinkled with words from Arabic, Greek, and Spanish. This was a language of necessity, not of culture. No child ever learned it as their mother tongue. It existed for one purpose only: to facilitate trade and basic diplomacy across hostile frontiers. Historian John Edwards described it perfectly, calling it a language born from the urgent need to communicate. This simple, practical tongue allowed for the exchange of silk, spices, and vital secrets, creating a kind of proto-global market right there in the Mediterranean. Its grammar was stripped down, its vocabulary focused on numbers, goods, and essential commands. It was a linguistic tool, efficient and purely functional. But the lingua franca did not fade away with a bang. Its decline was as silent as its rise. As colonial powers like France and Britain grew stronger, they imposed their own standardized languages. With improved translation and more formal diplomacy, the need for this fluid, adaptive pidgin simply evaporated. It vanished from the docks and the markets almost without a trace. Yet its ghost lingers powerfully in our modern vocabulary. We still use the term lingua franca to describe any common language that bridges cultures, from English in business to computer code in technology. The phantom tongue of the Mediterranean is gone, but it taught the world a crucial lesson: that even the most temporary linguistic solutions can etch permanent marks on our global culture. This idea of a language forged purely by necessity would be tested again, in a much harsher environment, the frozen Arctic coast. Far north of the Mediterranean's warm currents, a different kind of trade language was forged by ice and necessity. For a few months each summer, the Barents Sea became a stage for a silent bargain. Russian fishing boats, laden with sacks of grain, would meet Norwegian vessels heavy with the season's catch of cod. They had no common language, only a shared need. From this stark, seasonal meeting, Norsk was born. This pidgin tongue was a masterpiece of minimalism, built from a tiny vocabulary of just 150 to 200 words, split almost perfectly between Norwegian and Russian. It was a language of pure function, stripped of all but the most essential grammar. Its only purpose was to negotiate the price of fish and flour. Linguist Ingvild Brock called it a testament to human pragmatism, where mutual economic benefit overrode all linguistic and political differences. No one ever wrote a poem in Norsk. No child ever spoke it at home. It lived only on the decks of those boats at the very edge of two empires, surviving solely for the duration of the trade season. Then, in the early 20th century, steamships and new international agreements made the old barter system obsolete. The reason for Norsk's existence vanished, and the language disappeared with it almost overnight. All that remains are a few phrases scribbled in the logs of sailors who witnessed this fleeting linguistic miracle. Yet its legacy is profound. In a world often divided by borders and politics, Norsk stands as a quiet monument to a simple truth. When people have a shared goal, they will always find a way to communicate, building a bridge from the few words they have. This spirit of pure, pragmatic cooperation would find its ultimate test not on the open sea, but in the vast, silent desert. Across the burning sands, the great caravans moved like slow rivers of commerce, connecting worlds that most people never knew existed. A single caravan could be a city on the move, 1,000 camels strong, carrying slabs of salt south and returning north laden with gold and ivory. This was not a journey of days, but of months across one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. To survive and succeed, these merchants developed something far more complex than a single pidgin language. They created an entire caravan's code, a sophisticated system of communication that wove together spoken words, silent signals, and hidden markers. Historian E. Anne McDougall noted that the silence of the desert was filled with a sophisticated, non-verbal language of commerce that guided caravans for centuries. This was a family of communicative practices, a toolkit for survival. It included specific hand signals to convey danger or directions across the vast, open spaces where voices would be lost to the wind. They used marker systems, subtle arrangements of stones or notches on specific dunes, to indicate the safest paths and the locations of precious, life-giving water wells. And of course, there were the pidgin tongues, fluid mixtures of Berber, Arabic, and various sub-Saharan African languages that allowed for the crucial negotiation of prices and goods. This linguistic ecosystem did more than just facilitate trade. It enabled the transfer of entire civilizations. Along these sandy highways, Islamic scholarship traveled south, while gold and innovative technologies flowed north. The empires of Ghana and Mali did not rise in isolation. They were connected to the wider world by this intricate web of communication. The slow death of these languages began not with a sudden collapse, but with the drawing of new lines on maps. Colonial powers imposed borders that cut across the ancient, fluid trade routes. The steam engine and the railroad offered new, faster paths for goods, making the long, perilous caravan journeys less economically vital. As the trade routes faded, so did the specific languages and codes that served them. They were not formally documented, they were simply no longer needed, and so they vanished back into the desert sands from which they emerged. Yet their influence is not lost. It is embedded in the very cultural and genetic fabric of the Sahel region, the belt of land south of the Sahara. The trade networks they built were a prototype for our modern global supply chains, a stunning demonstration of how commerce can weave societies together long before the word globalization was ever spoken. This same spirit of connection, born not from sand but from sea, was simultaneously creating a web of communication across an even vaster ocean. While the desert caravans moved to the rhythm of camels, the Pacific Ocean was crossed by the silent glide of outrigger canoes. Long before any European map depicted its islands, a vast and sophisticated web of trade connected this watery continent. Voyagers, navigating by the stars and reading the subtle language of the waves, would meet at designated islands to exchange vital goods, obsidian for tools, vibrant feathers for ceremony, and intricate pottery. In these temporary marketplaces under the palm trees, a different kind of linguistic magic occurred. To facilitate this essential exchange, traders developed fleeting contact languages, unstable but brilliantly effective jargons that existed only for the season. These were not languages with rigid rules but fluid mixes, blending words from various Austronesian tongues to create a momentary common ground. As anthropologist Patrick Kirch reminds us, the archaeological record is clear. Goods moved over thousands of miles, a feat impossible without some form of shared communication, however rudimentary. A trader from one island chain and a chief from another, with no knowledge of each other's native speech, could barter and build rapport using this temporary linguistic bridge. Unlike the more stable Pidgins of the Mediterranean or the Arctic, these Pacific jargons left almost no trace. They were as ephemeral as the wake behind a canoe, vanishing as soon as the trading canoes returned to their home horizons. Yet their impact was anything but transient. It was through these temporary languages that revolutionary agricultural techniques, like the complex cultivation of taro, spread from island to island. Cultural artifacts, artistic styles, and even spiritual ideas traveled along these routes, carried by the same voices that negotiated for shells and stone tools. This created a shared cultural foundation across the immense expanse of the Pacific, a unity built upon countless brief, forgotten conversations. The profound lesson of these vanished jargons is that the most vital connections in human history are sometimes the most transient, designed not to last but to serve an immediate and crucial purpose. This same principle of a temporary, universal tool would soon be applied to something even more fundamental than language, an object that could be understood by everyone, everywhere. While the Pacific traders built understanding with fleeting words, another, far more universal language was being minted in the mountains of the Americas. This language had no grammar and no vocabulary, yet it was understood from the bustling markets of Beijing to the fledgling shops of Boston. Its words were coins, specifically the Spanish silver dollar, often called the piece of 8. For nearly 3 centuries, this silver became the world's first truly global currency, a silent, metallic lingua franca that everyone could speak. Its value was not debated in a dozen different tongues. It was measured on a scale and recognized instantly. This was a system built on a shared, unspoken agreement about purity, weight, and trust. Economic historian Dennis Flynn captured its power perfectly, describing the silver trade as the skeleton upon which the flesh of early modern globalization was hung. This single, silent standard enabled unimaginably complex trade. Silver mined in Spanish America would be shipped to Europe, used to purchase Asian goods like spices and silk, which then traveled across the world, all financed by this one universally accepted metal. It dictated the routes of galleons and the fates of empires, fueling both commerce and colossal wars. Its decline was not sudden, but a slow shift in trust. The adoption of the gold standard and the rise of paper currency, backed by governments rather than raw metal, eventually made the heavy silver coins obsolete. Yet the ghost of the piece of 8 lives on in our modern global monetary system, the very idea that we can all agree on a common measure of value. This story proves that the most powerful trade languages are not always spoken. They can be weighed in your hand, a principle that was being expressed in an entirely different form across the vast landscapes of North America. Deep in the North American forests, where rivers were the only highways, a different kind of nation was being forged. It was a world of French voyageurs in birchbark canoes, British traders from distant forts, and generations of Native American hunters from nations like the Ojibwe and Cree. They met in a space that was not fully European nor fully indigenous, a cultural territory that historian Richard White brilliantly called the middle ground. In this world, survival and profit depended on a fragile but powerful tool, pidgin languages, tongues like Michif, a mix of French and Cree or other jargons blending English and Algonquian words, became the lifeblood of the continent. These were not languages of poetry or prayer, they were languages of practical necessity, built for the negotiation of beaver pelts, iron kettles, and musket balls. Their vocabularies were ruthlessly specific, filled with words for grades of fur, types of cloth, and the precise terms needed for solemn treaty agreements. But they were more than just a commercial code, they were the social glue of the frontier. A trader who could speak even a broken version of the local trade jargon could build the personal relationships, the trust that was the true currency of the wilderness. Through these limited but expressive tongues, new societies emerged. Métis communities, born from marriages between European fur traders and native women, became the living embodiment of this middle ground, and their unique pidgin languages were the sound of a new, hybrid identity being born. The end of this linguistic world was not a natural death. As the beaver populations dwindled and the fur trade's economic dominance waned, colonial governments moved in. They saw these fluid, adaptive languages as chaotic and primitive. Official policy sought to replace them with proper English or French, languages of administration and control that did not accommodate the middle ground. The Pidgins were suppressed, their speakers assimilated, and the vibrant world they built began to fade from memory, yet you can still hear their echoes today. They live on in the names of countless American towns and rivers, in loanwords like caribou and pecan that seamlessly entered the English language, and most profoundly, in the enduring cultural heritage of the Métis people. These forgotten trade languages prove that commerce does not only move goods, it can weave entirely new cultures into existence, leaving an indelible mark on a continent's identity long after the last trade canoe has rotted away. This remarkable fusion of two distinct worlds finds a powerful parallel across the globe, where another ancient trade route connected civilizations for millennia. The Silk Road was not a single path but a sprawling web of arteries, and the blood pumping through its heart was the Sogdian language. For centuries, the merchants from Sogdiana, a region nestled in Central Asia, were the indispensable middlemen of the ancient world. Theirs was the language of the deal, the tongue that bridged the imperial courts of China and the bustling markets of the West. Step inside a caravanserai, a bustling desert oasis for travelers, and the air would be thick with a cacophony of sounds, the guttural tones of Turkic, the melodic flow of Persian, the distinct syllables of Chinese, all woven together by the common thread of Sogdian. This was not a crude pidgin, but a full, rich language capable of poetry, law, and faith. Its dominance is etched into history not through legend, but through physical proof, a treasure trove of letters, mercantile contracts, and religious manuscripts found sealed for centuries in the caves of Dunhuang. Linguist Nicholas Sims Williams perfectly captures its role, calling Sogdian the English of the medieval Silk Road. It was this language that allowed for the transfer of far more than silk and spices. Revolutionary technologies like papermaking and entire belief systems including Buddhism and Manichaeism traveled west on the tongues of Sogdian traders. The decline of this linguistic giant was slow, eroded by the upheaval of the Mongol invasions, the shifting of trade to the sea, and the rising political dominance of Persian and later Turkic languages. Sogdian itself eventually faded from daily speech, but its influence was already cemented into the foundations of Eurasian civilization. It proves that a trade language can be a vessel for civilization itself, carrying the very ideas that reshape continents. This ancient role of a connector language built for a specific and vast network finds a startlingly direct descendant in our modern world, one made not of silk but of silicon. These very boardrooms, buzzing with phrases about low-hanging fruit and circling back, operate on a linguistic principle that is centuries old. The global jargon of business is our modern trade pidgin. It is a stripped-down, functional language designed for one primary purpose: to allow people from Tokyo to Toronto to communicate with minimal confusion. It deliberately sacrifices the rich nuance of native tongues for the sake of clarity and speed, mirroring the exact same logic that created the Lingua Franca on the docks of the Mediterranean. Management theorists point out that this corporate speak, for all its clichés, builds a neutral common ground. It sidesteps the deep cultural subtleties that could derail a multi-million-dollar deal, creating a level playing field where the only goal is mutual economic benefit. This is not the language of poetry or heart-to-heart conversation. It is the language of the deal, a tool for efficiency that echoes the pragmatic spirit of Norsk fishermen bartering for cod. While we might laugh at its buzzwords, this linguistic phenomenon is a profound adaptation to our hyper-globalized world. It proves that the ancient driver of linguistic innovation, pure economic necessity, is just as powerful today. Our virtual meetings and endless email chains are simply the latest caravanserais, where a new digital lingua franca is being spoken. This relentless drive for efficient communication, born from commerce, did more than just shape our vocabulary. It went on to forge the very legal frameworks that now bind our nations together. That same relentless drive for clarity, born on the docks and in the desert caravans, had to find its way into the written word. When a deal worth a fortune rests on a single phrase, ambiguity is not an option. This pressure forged a new kind of language, one not spoken in markets but written in contracts, a legal lingua franca that would become the invisible architecture of international law. Its earliest and most influential form was the lex mercatoria, or the law merchant. This was not a legal code handed down by a king or an emperor. It was a living, breathing body of commercial customs that evolved organically among merchants themselves, a common law of the sea, and the marketplace that was understood from London to Venice. Its power came from its universality. As legal scholar Harold Berman argued, it was a universal law based on custom and common to all nations. It relied on a shared, precise understanding of terms. What exactly constituted a bill of lading? How was insurance defined? When was a payment truly in default? These definitions had to be crystal clear to everyone involved, regardless of their native tongue. This necessity forced legal language to strip itself bare. The ornate flourishes and poetic ambiguities of other writing had no place here. The goal was specificity above all else, a move away from linguistic beauty and toward unshakable precision. The ghost of this pragmatic tradition is alive and well in the dense, technical prose of a modern international trade agreement or a corporate merger document. Every hereinafter, every force majeure, every meticulously defined clause is a direct intellectual descendant of those early traders who simply needed to make sure a shipment of pepper was the same quality for a Dutch buyer as it was for an Arab seller. This legal framework, born from the urgent need to communicate across cultures, did more than just prevent disputes. It provided a stable, predictable foundation upon which trust could be built between strangers. It was the bedrock that allowed capital to flow and complex economic systems to emerge, proving that the most enduring legacy of a trade language might not be a word we speak, but a rule we all agree to follow. The ghost of every forgotten trade language lives on in the global economy. Their most profound legacy is not a list of words, but the very architecture of modern capitalism. By creating a reliable medium for negotiation across vast cultural divides, these pidgins and lingua francas performed a kind of economic magic. They drastically lowered the cost of doing business with strangers and reduced the paralyzing uncertainty of distant trade. This was the essential first step. Without a way to reliably agree on what was being sold, for what price, and under what terms, large-scale market economies could never have emerged. These languages built the initial bridge of trust. A merchant in Cairo could extend credit to a ship captain from Genoa because they had a shared, if simple, language in which to define the debt. Complex partnerships could form, pooling capital from investors who spoke different native tongues but shared a common goal, all because they had a linguistic tool to write the contract. Historian Niall Ferguson argues that the killer applications of Western civilization, like competition and scientific revolution, were only possible because of underlying networks of communication and trust. The silent, uncredited work of these lost trade languages was to weave that very network. They were the original social infrastructure for global finance. Their ultimate disappearance is the clearest sign of their success. Once their function was absorbed into standardized education and dominant languages like English, the specialized tools themselves became obsolete. The economic systems they enabled, however, the credit networks, the joint stock companies, the very idea of a global market, not only endured but became the bedrock of our world. This creation of a secure, shared language to enable trust between distant parties finds a fascinating, modern echo in a place you might not expect, the digital realm of secret codes and cryptography. But for every bridge of words built to connect people, another was constructed to keep them out. Alongside the open pigeons of the marketplace thrived a shadow world of secret languages, cants, and codes, all designed to protect commercial advantage. Medieval guilds developed cryptic jargons to guard the secrets of their crafts, from glassmaking to metalwork. On the floors of modern stock exchanges, a whirlwind of elaborate hand signals continues to communicate buy and sell orders in a silent, efficient code understood only by initiates. These are anti-languages, linguistic fortresses built not to include but to exclude. They created a wall between the insider and the outsider, turning commerce into a game of hidden information. Consider the thieves' cant of Europe, a sprawling vocabulary of slang used by vagrants and criminals, but also adopted by merchants operating in grey markets to discuss sensitive deals away from the ears of tax collectors. Or the Hagobish code of the legendary Armenian merchant networks, a system of secret symbols and phrases used to encrypt messages about market conditions and prices, ensuring their trade caravans retained a critical informational edge. This was insider trading long before the concept had a legal name. The entire purpose of these covert systems was to leave no trace for competitors, to communicate in plain sight while revealing nothing. Their legacy is not etched in stone, but it echoes powerfully in our modern world. The dense legalese of a commercial confidentiality agreement, the shadowy realm of corporate espionage, and the encrypted digital channels used by today's high-frequency traders all serve the same ancient purpose, protecting commercial advantage through selective silence. This reveals a crucial duality. The same drive for profit that created open languages of connection also forged secret languages of exclusion. This tension between sharing information and hoarding it is a fundamental pulse in the heart of commerce itself. A tension that would profoundly influence an even more powerful force, the spread of the world's great religions. A merchant's caravan did more than carry silk and spices, it transported entire worldviews. The same road that delivered goods from one empire to another became a highway for the soul, carrying Buddhism from India to China and Islam deep into Africa and Southeast Asia. This was not a coincidence. The pragmatic communication channels built by commerce, the very same pidgins and trade languages used to barter for salt and textiles, became the initial vessels for translating the most profound spiritual concepts. A Sogdian trader, fluent in the mercantile dialects of the Silk Road, could explain the basic tenets of Buddhism to a Chinese scholar using the shared commercial vocabulary they both understood. These languages provided the first rough dictionary for faith. They were the bridge that allowed a missionary, often arriving later and following the trails blazed by merchants, to make the first connection with a new culture. The words for trust, debt, and promise, so essential to making a deal, could be repurposed to discuss karma, covenant, and salvation. This symbiosis reveals that trade languages were never merely functional tools for barter. They were adaptable conduits for the most transformative ideas in human history, carrying faith and philosophy across continents 1,000 years before mass media existed. The pathways carved by commerce for material goods inevitably became channels for the immaterial, for the questions that define civilizations. This fusion of practical communication and profound belief did more than spread religion. It ultimately prepared the ground for a new way of seeing the world, one that would value observation and evidence, paving the way for the scientific revolution. The same precision required to price a bolt of silk was soon needed to classify a new species of orchid. As trade ships unloaded their exotic cargo in European ports, they delivered a tidal wave of biological confusion. Alongside spices and fabrics came strange plants, bizarre animals, and unfamiliar minerals, each one a puzzle that existing languages could not solve. A merchant in Amsterdam and a scholar in Lisbon needed to be certain they were discussing the exact same plant, not just two things that looked vaguely similar. This commercial chaos demanded a new kind of order, a universal system for naming the natural world. The solution arrived in the form of a Swedish botanist, Carl Linnaeus, who devised a system of classification using a dead language for a very living purpose. Latin, no longer anyone's native tongue, became the perfect neutral ground, a biological lingua franca. His binomial nomenclature gave every species a two-part name, a universal label that was unambiguous and understood from London to Beijing. This system was directly fueled by global trade. Many of the specimens Linnaeus and his contemporaries classified were first collected by naturalists who sailed on trading company ships, their scientific voyages funded by the same commercial interests that sought to catalog and exploit the world's resources. The very word porcelain comes from the Italian for a cowrie shell, whose smooth surface the ceramic resembled. Sugar travels from the Sanskrit sharkara through Arabic sukkar before sweetening European languages. Orange began its journey in ancient India. These are not just borrowed words, they are linguistic fossils of trade routes, embedded now in the very language of science. The practical, meticulous work of describing a spice for a commercial invoice, getting the color, weight, and texture exactly right, established a habit of mind. It was a short step from there to describing the universe itself with the same rigorous clarity. The entire framework of modern science, from chemistry to physics, depends on this inherited principle, a precise and shared vocabulary that allows a discovery in Tokyo to be replicated in a lab in Texas. That global exchange of knowledge, started by merchants arguing over samples, was the true precursor to our modern information age, proving that the language of commerce did not just move goods, it taught humanity how to think about the world with systematic precision. The very first marks pressed into wet clay were not poetry, they were receipts. Long before anyone wrote an epic, merchants were scratching tallies of grain and livestock into tablets, solving the oldest problem in commerce: how to make a promise to someone who speaks a different language and will not return for months. This fundamental need to communicate across divides of space and culture did not just create spoken pidgins, it sparked the entire technological evolution of communication. The drive to record a transaction between a Sumerian and an Akkadian encouraged the simplification of complex writing into pictograms and numbers, a universal code that could be understood without a shared grammar. This was the birth of data. That same relentless pressure centuries later would push Samuel Morse to develop his famous code, a new pigeon of dots and dashes that could travel over wires, allowing a broker in London to instantly know the price of cotton in New Orleans. The telegraph was a trade language for the industrial age, and this lineage leads directly to the humming server farms of our own time. The internet is the ultimate global trade pigeon. Its foundational protocols, like TCP/IP, are not spoken by anyone, yet they are understood by every device on the network. They form a silent, minimalist grammar that allows a smartphone in Seoul and a laptop in Lisbon to negotiate the exchange of information, the modern world's most valuable currency. The efficient digital handshake between two computers is a direct descendant of the knotted agreement between a Russian and Norwegian fisherman on the deck of a boat, a shared understanding built for mutual benefit. The history of these vanished tongues is, in fact, the hidden prehistory of our digital world. And just as those old jargons appeared and faded with the trade routes that needed them, our digital world now generates its own ephemeral languages, from the fleeting slang of social media to the specialized commands of an AI, proving that the ancient impulse to connect is still inventing new ways to speak. Our own digital bazaar is spinning new pigeons into existence at light speed. The global town square of social media and e-commerce runs on a constantly shifting vocabulary of internet slang, viral memes, and emojis. These are the new trade languages of the 21st century, facilitating the exchange of ideas, humor, and even commercial identity across every border. A single image macro or a phrase like "it is a feature, not a bug" can instantly convey a complex concept about technology, corporate excuses, and user experience to someone in Berlin, Sao Paulo, or Seoul, bypassing the need for a direct translation. This digital pigeon is ruthlessly efficient and incredibly fragile. Its life cycle is measured in weeks, not centuries. A meme emerges from the depths of a niche forum, achieves global virality, and is then discarded, its meaning exhausted, leaving behind only a faint digital footprint in an archived post. This breathtakingly short existence is a direct parallel to the fleeting Pacific trade jargons that were created for a single bartering season and then vanished when the canoes sailed home. We are now living through the same process, just on an accelerated planetary scale. The legacy of this constant churn is a new, fluid layer of global culture, born entirely from the intersection of our technology and our commercial drives. It proves that the ancient human impulse to forge a common tongue for mutual benefit is a fundamental constant. The mediums have changed from the spoken word to the pixel, but the underlying drive remains identical. This relentless evolution forces a difficult question. If our shared language is now this transient, what does that mean for the cultural identities it is supposed to express? The same economic forces that built bridges of communication could just as easily burn them. A dominant trade language did not simply coexist with local dialects, it often actively consumed them. As empires expanded their commercial reach, languages like English, Spanish, and Arabic became more than just tools for trade. They became symbols of power and access. To secure a loan, to negotiate a fair treaty, or simply to get a job in a colonial port, you needed to speak the language of the deal. This was linguistic imperialism in its purest form, where economic necessity forced the abandonment of native tongues. The vibrant, specialized pigeons that once thrived in niche trade networks were the first to vanish, rendered obsolete by a new, all-encompassing linguistic standard. The loss was not merely a matter of vocabulary. Each language holds a unique worldview, a specific way of categorizing the natural and social universe. When a language like Jargon from Tierra del Fuego disappears, it takes with its distinct words for intricate family relationships and subtle ecological knowledge that do not exist in English. A UNESCO stark warning that a language dies every 2 weeks is not just a statistic, it is a count of entire cultural libraries being set ablaze. Many of these losses are direct casualties of economic integration, the price paid for a seat at the global table. This is the ghost of lost trade languages whispering a cautionary tale. The drive for a common tongue, while powerful and often practical, carries a profound cultural cost. It forces a difficult choice between the efficiency of a single language and the breathtaking diversity of many. What priceless ways of seeing the world are we sacrificing for the sake of smoother transactions? This erosion is an ancient story, perfectly illustrated by the fate of a once mighty maritime tongue, the Lingua Franca of the Mediterranean. Its ultimate disappearance was not a natural death, but a deliberate replacement. The Mediterranean Lingua Franca did not simply fade from memory. It was systematically dismantled. The rise of the modern European nation-state in the 18th and 19th centuries demanded a new kind of order, one built on unified national identity, and a single, standardized language was its most powerful symbol. The fluid, borderless pidgin of the docks, which belonged to no king and served only commerce, was viewed as chaotic, even dangerous. It was a linguistic free agent in a world increasingly obsessed with control. In response, governments established official language academies, institutions tasked with purifying and codifying their national tongues, actively stamping out the perceived corruption of hybrid languages like the Lingua Franca. The legacy of this campaign is the modern world map, neatly colored with its official languages, a cartography of power that often ignores the messy, multilingual reality of the people living within those borders. This was a silent, profound victory of political identity over raw economic pragmatism. The death of the Lingua Franca teaches us that a language is never just a tool for talking. Its life is dictated by politics, and its death is often an act of policy, a theme that grows even darker when we examine how language itself can be turned into a tool of subjugation. A pidgin can be a bridge, but it can also be a chain. In the shadow of colonial outposts and rubber plantations, the creation of a trade language was not always a mutual act of pragmatism. European colonizers frequently refused to learn the complex local tongues, deeming them primitive. Instead, they imposed drastically simplified pidgins, crafting them into the language of command. In the mines of southern Africa, Fanagalo became the tool for giving orders, a stripped-down mix of Zulu, English, and Afrikaans that allowed a white overseer to direct a black laborer without ever understanding his culture, his history, or his worldview. These were not languages of negotiation, but of instruction. They were deliberately designed to be functional for giving directions and utterly useless for expressing poetry, grief, or philosophical thought. This linguistic stripping away was a profound act of power, reinforcing the hierarchy at every spoken word. The colonizer retained the richness of their own native language for complex thought and administration, while the colonized were forced into a linguistic cage, a limited vocabulary that mirrored their circumscribed social position. The legacy of this dynamic is a deeply painful and complex linguistic heritage across many post-colonial nations. In Papua New Guinea, Tok Pisin, now a vibrant national language, has its roots in the plantation pidgin used to manage labor. Its very name comes from the English words tok pidgin. For some, it is a symbol of modern national unity, a language that transcends ancient tribal divisions. For others, its origins are a permanent reminder of subjugation, the language their grandparents were forced to speak under the watchful eye of an overseer. This is the dark duality of these linguistic tools. They could forge new communities and identities, yet their foundations were poured from the cement of inequality. The medium of communication itself became the message, and the message was control. This forces us to ask a difficult question when we see a common language emerge. Are we witnessing a bridge being built or a wall being erected? The answer often depends entirely on who holds the power to define its terms. The last speaker of a forgotten trade tongue carries a silent world inside them. Think of the elderly Norwegian fisherman, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of hauling nets, who could still recall the rough Russa phrases for the price of cod. For him, that language was not a historical curiosity. It was the sound of his youth, of summer barter and camaraderie on the open sea. When Russa died, a part of his own history became unreachable, a chapter of his life that no one else could read. Or picture the Caravan guide in the Sahara, a man who could read the desert's subtle language of stone markers and wind patterns. His knowledge was a living map passed down through generations, ensuring safe passage across a deadly expanse. When trucks and railroads replaced the camels, his profound wisdom became a relic, his role in the community rendered obsolete overnight. The loss of these languages is never just about words. It is the loss of an entire ecosystem of knowledge, a specialized understanding of the natural world, of weather patterns, of animal behavior, and of intricate social bonds that were all encoded within that specific speech. This is the silent cultural impoverishment that so often marches in lockstep with economic progress. We are forced to ask a difficult question: who truly benefits when a unique way of life is streamlined into oblivion? The story of globalization is not just one of connection and growth. It is also a story of dislocation and cultural amnesia. These linguistic ghosts remind us that history is written not in ledgers, but in the lives of the people who adapt, who struggle, and who are sometimes left behind by the very currents of commerce they help to create. Yet their voices are not completely silenced. They whisper to us in the most ordinary places, in the words we use without a second thought. Your morning cup of coffee is a direct linguistic import from the ancient trade routes of the Middle East. The word itself, coffee, is a ghost. It traveled from the Arabic kahwa through the Turkish kahv and into the ears of Venetian merchants who brought the bean and its name back to Europe. Each time you say it, you are echoing a transaction that happened centuries ago in a bustling Ottoman port. This phenomenon is everywhere in our speech. Ketchup, that universal condiment, has a journey just as global. It began as kersayap, a fermented fish sauce from Amoy, China. British traders in Southeast Asia tasted it, adopted the name, and eventually applied it to their own tomato-based creation, carrying the word across their empire. Even our most modern terms are built on these ancient foundations. Avatar, a word now synonymous with digital representation, is a direct loan from Sanskrit, entering Western consciousness not through commerce in spices, but through the trade in philosophical and religious ideas along the same Silk Road that carried silk. These words are more than just borrowed terms. They are lexical fossils, the preserved remains of dead trade routes and forgotten negotiations. Our entire vocabulary is a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped clean and written over, but with the faint, indelible traces of past interactions still visible beneath the surface. Every sentence we speak is a tapestry woven with threads from every corner of the globe, threads spun by merchants, sailors, and caravan guides. We are all, in our daily conversations, speaking the ghosts of deals made long ago. This hidden history lives on our tongues, connecting us to a past we can no longer see. But with so many languages completely vanished, their unique worldviews erased, can we ever truly recover what was lost in the silence? A single word scrawled on a broken piece of pottery can rewrite history. These are the fragments that archaeologists and linguists hunt for, the scattered clues that allow us to hear the echoes of a language no one has spoken for centuries. The process is not unlike forensic detective work, piecing together a ghost from its footprints. When a merchant's ledger is discovered in the ruins of a caravanserai, it is not just a list of goods, it is a linguistic snapshot. It tells us which words were essential for trade, which numbers were used, and how different tongues collided in the marketplace. A traveler's diary, filled with phonetic attempts to record a local pidgin, becomes a priceless time capsule. These tiny, accidental records are often all that remains of an entire mode of communication. Linguists like Sarah Thomason specialize in this intricate puzzle, studying how languages in contact borrow, adapt, and create entirely new systems. By analyzing the patterns of loanwords that seeped from a trade pidgin into a local dialect, they can reverse engineer the lost language. If a dozen modern languages across the Indian Ocean all use a similar foreign word for pepper or cinnamon, it points to a vanished trade jargon that once connected them. This painstaking reconstruction reveals a profound truth. Our world has been a deeply interconnected place for millennia. The globalized economy we think of as modern has ancient roots, all traceable through these linguistic fossils. Every recovered word is a small victory against the silence of time, a whisper from a Saharan guide or a Pacific navigator that helps us understand the complex, collaborative tapestry of our shared journey. This forensic approach does more than illuminate the past. It reveals the fundamental patterns of how languages are born, live, and die. By understanding these cycles, we can begin to see the trajectory of our own digital pidgins and predict the linguistic landscape of the future. The cycle of linguistic rise and fall suggests a humbling future for global English. Its current dominance feels absolute, woven into the fabric of international finance, diplomacy, and technology. Yet this is precisely what merchants in the Sogdian caravanserais or the Mediterranean ports must have felt about their own indispensable tongues. They too believed their linguistic tool was permanent, a fixed feature of the commercial world. History, however, offers no permanent guarantees. A language's global status is not a product of its inherent beauty or logic, but a direct reflection of economic and political power. Should that foundation of power shift dramatically, the linguistic superstructure built upon it becomes vulnerable. We are already seeing early tremors of this phenomenon. Some linguists point to the emergence of Globish, a stripped-down, simplified form of English using a core vocabulary of only about 1,500 words. This is not the English of Shakespeare or complex legal contracts. It is a functional pidgin for basic business and travel, mirroring the pragmatic, limited scope of Russa Norsk. It exists to get the deal done, not to discuss poetry or philosophy. This is how a global language begins to fragment, not with a sudden collapse, but with a gradual simplification and regional adaptation. Just as Latin fractured into the Romance languages after the Roman Empire's political cohesion faded, global English could eventually splinter into distinct, mutually unintelligible dialects, each shaped by local cultures and needs. The legacy of every lost trade language is a lesson in humility for any dominant tongue. It whispers that linguistic supremacy is always, without exception, a temporary condition. The relentless forces of economics and cultural change that built these bridges of words will, in time, dismantle them or build new ones. This perspective forces us to see the current linguistic landscape not as a final state, but as a single frame in a continuously moving film. This cyclical view of history, where languages and empires rise and fall, brings us to the profound philosophical implications of this entire journey through silence and speech. The silence left by these vanished tongues is itself a powerful statement. Their complete erasure from our collective memory teaches a humbling lesson about the nature of human creation. We often build our sense of history on the bedrock of what remains, the pyramids, the constitutions, the great works of art. But the story of these trade languages forces us to consider a different truth. The most vital architecture of civilization is often temporary, woven from the fleeting conversations of merchants and fishermen, from the hand signals of caravan guides and the nodded agreements on a ship's deck. These were the silent, everyday interactions of ordinary people, the countless negotiations and compromises that actually made cross-cultural coexistence and commerce possible for centuries. Their legacy is not carved in stone, but it is embedded in the very fact that our globalized world exists at all. This philosophical shift asks us to find meaning not only in what stands the test of time, but also in what was designed to be temporary. We must learn to listen for the echoes in the emptiness. It suggests that the most foundational layers of our shared world, the legal frameworks, the economic networks, the very words we use, were often laid down by forgotten hands and articulated in forgotten tongues. They built the stage and then exited without a bow, leaving us to inhabit a world whose deepest foundations are invisible. Our journey through these linguistic echoes reveals a startling truth. The modern world was built on a foundation of forgotten words. From the docks of the Mediterranean to the fishing grounds of the Arctic, from the caravan trails of the Sahara to the island markets of the Pacific, these pragmatic tongues were the unsung architects of our reality. They did more than just barter for salt and silk. They lowered the towering barriers of mistrust between cultures, enabling the very first inklings of a world economy. These languages silently encoded the principles of cooperation directly into the DNA of commerce, proving that mutual benefit could be a more powerful force than conflict. While they have vanished from human speech, their legacy is woven into the fabric of our lives, present in our legal frameworks, our scientific nomenclature, our digital networks, and the very vocabulary we use without a second thought. They teach us a profound lesson that the deepest human connections are often forged in the fires of necessity. The most impactful forces shaping our world are frequently the most invisible, operating not in grand declarations but in the quiet, practical agreements between strangers. The entire history of human progress is in many ways the history of our endless attempts to learn how to talk to one another. Let this exploration be a call to listen more closely to the silences of our past, for they are filled with the whispers of our shared journey. These ghosts challenge us to reflect on the invisible bridges in our own lives. What word do you use every day that might carry a hidden history from a distant shore? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to continue unraveling the profound mysteries that shape our world. A merchant haggling over spices in a medieval souk and a teenager trading digital skins in an online game are separated by centuries, yet bound by an identical human impulse. They are both architects of common ground, using whatever tools are available to create shared meaning and value across a divide. The lost trade languages were not failures or historical dead ends. They were brilliant, successful adaptations that served their precise purpose perfectly. They emerged from necessity, fulfilled their function, and then, like a scaffolding removed after a building is complete, they made way for new forms of connection. Their true, unshakable legacy is not a dictionary, but a demonstrated capacity. They are proof of our species' relentless ingenuity in the face of difference, our stubborn refusal to let a lack of common words be a barrier to common purpose. This long view reveals a profound truth. Globalization is not a modern invention or a corporate strategy. It is a deep-seated human instinct, a fundamental drive to reach beyond our immediate tribe and connect. Our current hyper-complex global culture, with its digital marketplaces and international supply chains, is not a radical break from the past. It is simply the latest, most technologically advanced iteration of a process that began when the first two strangers on a riverbank gestured toward each other's goods. This perspective offers a quietly hopeful vision for our future. Our greatest strength may not lie in the perfection of our communication, but in our persistent, imperfect will to try. The spirit of the Lingua Franca and Russa Norsk did not vanish. It simply evolved, ensuring that the bridges we build with words, however temporary, will always outlast the silence they replace.